We continue learning about the fall of Jerusalem in the prophetic tradition. Today in Ezekiel, I am Andrew Whaley. Ezekiel, much like Isaiah and Jeremiah, is most concerned with the fall of Jerusalem. He too interprets that fall as the judgment of God, and yet speaks of the fidelity of God to the people that gives them hope even in the midst of their despair. Now, Ezekiel is a particularly weird guy who does some strange things. He goes through a period of muteness. He lies on his side, bound and naked. He digs holes in walls. He goes through an emotional paralysis after his wife dies, and he has some really strange visions. He's a strange guy, so just be prepared for that as you read it. Ezekiel also comes out of the priestly tradition. You remember the priestly tradition was largely responsible for the book of Leviticus, and the priestly tradition is very concerned with holiness. So as you read Ezekiel, pay attention to the times that he speaks about the holiness of God. His main concern with the judgment of God, then, is how can a holy God remain faithful to an unholy people? Now, Ezekiel can really be divided into two major sections. Chapter 1 through 24 deals with the impending judgment. We learn that Ezekiel himself is an early exile to Babylon. He is not in Jerusalem in the years leading up to the fall of Jerusalem. He's already been taken away. And his primary concern is with the unholy treatment of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, Ezekiel condemns everybody, kings, priests, leaders, the regular people, but his harshest critique is for those priests who preside in the temple. In fact, this is what he says: "Its priests have done violence to my teaching and have profaned my holy things. They have made no distinction between the holy and the common, neither have they taught the difference between the unclean and the clean, and they have disregarded my Sabbaths, so that I am profaned among them." The second half of Ezekiel, chapters 25 to 48, is an anticipated restoration. In chapter 33, Ezekiel learns about the fall of Jerusalem, and all of a sudden his woe turns to hope. His hope is almost a counterpoint to the judgments that were declared in the first part of the book. Here in the second part of the book, we have this discussion of bad shepherds and good shepherds. The bad shepherds are the kings of Judah who led the people away from God, but Yahweh is declared the good shepherd who will restore the people. There's also the famous passage about God taking the people's heart of stone and turning it into a heart of flesh. But pay attention to that language. God does this not out of pure compassion for the people, but for the sake of God's holy name. The holiness of God will turn the people back to God. Then there's perhaps the most famous passage in Ezekiel, the valley of the dry bones. God animates the bones and puts flesh back on them. But again, why does God do it? For the sake of God's holy name, and so that the people will honor and revere this holy God. And then finally, we find in Ezekiel the restoration of the temple. The glory of the Lord is restored, and right cultic worship practices return once again. Holiness before God, the central theme of Ezekiel. So may you follow Ezekiel in his woe and in the counterpoint of his hope as we move from the fall of Jerusalem to a nation restored and a temple reconvened.